So my name's Chris, Laura said, co-founder, chief product officer of Button. This is the third tap, and I've gotten the opportunity to speak to a number of people on this stage, but never someone that I've followed for longer than I've followed Scott. I don't know if he knows this. This might be kind of awkward. So followed him for literally close to 15 years. I've been aware of kind of what Scott's been doing. So Laura told you, founded Behance, became a movement in the product and design industry, a way for people to express themselves, share what they're doing, and represent what their work. Since Scott has gone on to be a luminary in product and design thinking and how it applies to business. Someone who 3 years ago when we founded Button, he was writing on topics that were so on point to what we were doing. And so I am incredibly excited to be speaking to him on stage today. So thank you for coming.
That's very nice of you. I'm going to do this so it's like a little more like, you know.
Dialogue. So, okay, let's get into it. So, design and business.
Yep.
You know, you're well known for talking about how to apply product and design, why it matters, and how to apply it to business. So, why is product and design a viable and important component of a business strategy?
Where do I begin? I mean, and I think I'm probably preaching to the choir with a lot of folks in here, but I think that what has happened over the years, and I think a lot of us are participating in this, is that the success of technology, in some ways, has become less about the technology itself and more about the user's experience of the technology, which has allowed us to cheat in many ways. I mean, I remember in the early years of Pinterest, when they were having some scalability issues with the underlying technology, they just made it so that the images would load these different colored boxes before the images would actually load in through the CDNs. And it was one of those examples where users were like, oh my God, the site's so much faster. You know, and they were thinking, no, we didn't make any underlying technology improvements. It was all a design improvement. And I think there's so many examples of that also in the course of Behance and other companies I've worked at, where the user experience and the interface is actually, you know, as if not more important than the underlying technology. And then I also think that more and more businesses are becoming this almost like a slap hand game where it's like, you know, it's like a race to see who's like the top interface. And ultimately the interface that we use to make everyday choices, you know, is going to be the ultimate business. And a lot of the stuff that happens underneath will become commoditized and compete to be the default, you know, in that interface that we use every day. And when I even think about companies like Uber and Lyft and others, I think that, gosh, you know, if we end up just ordering a car by voice, then suddenly the underlying technology and services providing that car is abstracted away. And suddenly Amazon decides who actually sends the car to us, which is a very commoditizing force for companies like Uber and Lyft and others, right? So that, I think, is the reason why I think design and the interface in particular is such an exciting and important part of business going forward, because you can have the greatest, best technology in the world, but if you are not the default in the interface that your customers use, you may not even have a business anymore.
Absolutely. Something that we see in Button, you paint a picture of a world where a small number of companies' products control that interface. And like, for example, an Uber or Lyft can get commoditized away. Who do you see succeeding at building those interfaces? Who are the people that you believe will grow to be those interfaces based on what you see today?
Well, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that these interfaces that win will be coupled with hardware to some extent. And that, you know, I think one of the things that I think is stalling innovation the most right now in the world of technology is, especially consumer-facing technology, is the app system. I mean, the fact that everything is tucked away in these nice little apps. And you know, as we all know, like the stats show that people are downloading fewer and fewer apps than they've ever downloaded before now. We also know, and I wrote about this recently, how notifications have in some ways become the tragedy of the commons. You know, I was meeting with a team the other day that was telling me that, you know, actually, Scott, we figured out that if we put emoji in notifications, they get like 25% more conversion. And I'm just like, oh shit, that's so bad. Because now it's going to be like 2 emojis really works. Actually, if you do the whole thing emoji, it even works better. And if you make it 2 lines, it works better. And before you know it, like we are not even paying attention anymore to notifications. And that's why it's a tragedy of the commons. The concept is that it would have been a wonderful thing if everyone respected it. And actually, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is why there isn't some sort of central API that every app notification needs to go through. And so that there's this community-generated determination upon the value of certain notifications from certain apps. So if I send a notification to my users that gets 100% conversion because it's absolutely timely and important and relevant, then my notification should be seen more frequently, more going forward. But if I have like noisy notifications that people start tuning out, they should start to just disappear from other users. So that's like one potential solution to this. But I think more broadly speaking, when you tune into any sort of device, it should be more about where you are and what you're doing, what you're most likely to want to use, rather than this like random selection of apps. So I think that's one kind of one challenge we have in terms of thinking about the future interfaces that we're going to use in our everyday life.
Yeah. So you mentioned the first words were paired with hardware. So
wait, what?
Paired with hardware.
Oh yeah, paired with
hardware.
So
that to me, like 2 companies come to mind, Apple and Google.
Yep.
Do Apple and Google own the interface in perpetuity?
I think that, and Amazon to some extent, I think falls into this as well. I think that they're going to have a lot more interface power than they've ever had before. And I do think that it's going to cause a lot of the providers of services, that used to be their own apps, to suddenly feel commoditized and at the mercy of the ultimate owner of the interface, and which is, as you said, it's basically Google, Apple, Amazon, and even like a company like Facebook, without any sort of hardware, a lot of their services can become abstracted away by the interfaces people use to consume them. And I think it became even more clear when voice entered the paradigm, because voice literally abstracts everything away except for the conversation. And you realize, oh my goodness, like I'm not even having a preference towards brand anymore. I'm just literally saying what I want to know, and it's being provided to me. On the iPhone, when you need weather, you go to the weather app, which is powered by weather.com or Yahoo Weather or whatever, but you at least have that like connection, and you can go further, and you end up driving traffic to someone that's providing the information. But if I just ask for the weather, there's no chance of me doing that anymore. So I think there's a lot of implications for that. I do think that the hardware paired with software, is going to become even more of an issue, for a lot of the companies that are trying to provide great services as well.
Nice. So I see how tomorrow that gives us a nicer user experience. Long term, is that good for the user? Is it good for the user for such a small number of companies to have so much control?
Well, I think the question that I would like turn that into is, do us as users know what we want without it being merchandised to us? Mm-hmm. There's something very effective. Unfortunately, as humans, like out of sight, out of mind. The problem I have with the voice world is that I only can think of maybe 10 to 12 use cases off the top of my head. And the problem with that is that it only is triggered by things off the top of my head. Yeah. So it's hard to imagine a very long tail, open kind of business for applications in the voice ecosystem, potentially. And so I think that it's going to be somewhat perilous, but for some participants there. However, I also think that the folks that ultimately own the interfaces need these services, and they're going to have to find clever ways of merchandising them, and they're going to have to have better means of discovery. And maybe part of the solution to that counters this like singular interface is AI. Knowing where we are and what we're most likely to do. As I entered the theater, the most likely thing that I need at that moment is either a map of the theater, a ticket, information about where the restrooms are. Like there's things I need to know that are at this moment most important to me. So that the interface should ultimately adapt to me and should reveal kind of long tail services based on where I am and what I need. Again, rather than like have some sort of static or lowest common denominator set of offerings.
Yeah, you listed a lot of stuff that's happening, like AI, like consolidation of the interface. And we have a lot of folks in this room who control brands, who control merchants, who sell things directly, indirectly. What is the list of things today that you think people should be paying attention to and listening to, and like what their strategy should be with respect to them? What are the things you think they should be ignoring and kind of spending less time on?
I don't really know the answer. Like, I think that I mean, there are a lot of things that I look into that are probably the things all of you look into. I do believe that there will eventually be some sort of sources of truth for AR. Like, so as we walk around, there will be things that we just kind of see by default. Maybe it's because we're an Apple user or a Google user, or maybe there'll be like some connected. I hope it's all connected, so we don't have to switch worlds, to figure out what's around us, which is kind of a crazy phenomenon to think about. But augmented reality is totally real. I think that a few years from now, we will be seeing all kinds of contextual things around us that help us give insight, help us understand what's going on around us. And so if you're not playing in that space, you need to. I'm on the board of the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, and they just completed this huge digitization process where they took all the objects in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt and they scanned them, but they only scanned them like 2D. And I kind of asked, like, did we do anything 3D? And it was like, well, we didn't really have the budget for that. And so we stuck to like sort of normal scans. And I'm thinking like, but we're about to enter the world of AR, or we kind of need those, And so as you're developing content libraries and you're digitizing yourselves as a business, make sure that you are planning for a world where there are augmented reality, sort of 3D objects all around, rather than have to go back and do that later. Always be pushing a few teams within your companies, if you're large companies, to test and play with these technologies. I think that's also like a crucial thing that you have to do, even if it's not commercial yet. And because there's also sometimes a land rush amongst consumers. When they suddenly get a new functionality, everyone downloads these things and does things that they normally would never do. There were so many people around the world a week or two ago that were placing fake IKEA furniture around their homes, right? They would have never gone to IKEA and thought about purchasing furniture, but because IKEA was there first and had already digitized their entire collection and made this app available, which took like a few people to do, they really got a leg up there.
Yeah, I actually bought IKEA furniture from that app.
Oh, you did?
Maybe 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Haven't bought anything from IKEA in years, and totally got me. So that's an example of a really great kind of delightful experience. What have you interacted with recently that's delighted you? What was kind of the last delightful technology moment you had?
I mean, I think one of the things I'm focused most on these days is just really clever ways of eliminating friction. Because we do live in like a cross-platform, cross-device world. A big thing that I spent a lot of time focusing on when I was at Adobe, and I'm still trying to advise the company on now, is just, there are a lot of old and very important products that they make for the creative world, and there's still so many pop-ups and things you have to go through and compatibility issues and all this stuff. And I think they're actually entering a world where they're competing less on features and more on productivity and workflow and like happiness amongst its users. I think a lot of companies are starting to do that now. And so that is how I equate delight. And so even things like Slack, whenever you go in saying, hey, I forget my password, I don't want to do a reconfirm or whatever, just send me a magic link. Great insight into just completely eliminating the friction of an experience of getting into a product. And a lot of apps that are eliminating passwords altogether and just doing like SMS confirmation, or I think a lot of those insights and tactics are really important and move the needle for the consumer.
Awesome. I know today you have a broad variety of interests. You're co-founder at a number of companies. You advise on a number of companies. What's the thesis that ties it together? What are you interested in right now?
Well, I think one of the themes for my career has always been examples where technology is hurting people and or hurting their careers, and then helping turn that around. So for Behance, it was a time when creatives never got attribution for the work that they did. And they were always at the mercy of circumstance and getting new work, especially as freelancers. And there were entire companies that built spec contests with the intention of getting designers to do work for free. And so rather than technology empowering the career of a freelance creative or designer, technology was actually hurting their career by getting them to do more work for free, by commoditizing their labor on these open source, like open marketplaces and that sort of thing. And so Behance was really designed to help foster attribution in the creative world and help empower creative careers and help them, by getting the credit for their work, get the opportunity that they would deserve and foster some sense of what we like to call creative meritocracy. And I'm starting to see new examples like that emerge today. I mean, one of the companies I work super closely with and I'm a co-founder of is a company called Prefer, which has a team in New York and in San Francisco, small team though, in both places. And what Prefer is focused on is a similar conundrum, but facing the independent professional workforce. You know, by 2020, 40% of all professionals in the United States will be independent professionals of some kind. Massage therapists, attorneys that work alone, accountants that work alone, babysitters, dog walkers, like up and down across the board. And what all these people suffer from is they don't have the types of technologies that salons and agencies and firms have that allow you to kind of do your greatest work, not spend too much time on the administrative side, and get new leads, you know, from a brand. And so, I mean, as an example, Prefer is trying to help you as a client find the professionals your friends use. So you just you load up Prefer on your iPhone, you just literally, it scans your address book for anyone else who's on the platform, and then it shows you the professionals that they recommend. And suddenly, you don't have to go to like an open marketplace or Craigslist or whatever, you just like sort of see the people your friends are already using. And for professionals, that's kind of the holy grail for them. They'd love to have a steady stream of referrals from their clients' friends. And they'd also love to have tools to manage booking and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. So that's one example, you know, something that I'm focusing on. I love technology that empowers people to work and to kind of take the reins on their own career, their own future, that sort of thing. And another example, you know, in the past few years, I had a big role helping Periscope, you know, get off the ground. And it was interesting, like people see it as like just a social live streaming app, but the real insight there, I thought was interesting, was truth and empathy in social media. Everything in social media is like postured, people post photos, and also when we watch live news or live feeds, we can't really trust it sometimes because we can't manipulate, we can't influence the broadcaster. And so what Periscope was trying to do is say, hey, we're gonna let people to stream live where they are. You can experience the world through someone else's eyes. And by influencing the broadcaster, you can actually more, you know, trust it and have more empathy with what they're experiencing. And so that was an example of a social consumer product that really moved me because it empowered people to have that experience. So that's the kind of stuff that I look for as an investor, and you know, and occasionally helping things get off the ground.
That's awesome. So we all work at companies, and I think we'd all look at our own companies and say, we're somewhere on the scale of kind of design thinking. Either it plays a big part in how we think about building products, or you know, it really doesn't, and it's not part of it. If I'm sat here, and I'm not saying this is me, if I'm at a company where I don't think we're thinking about this right,
yeah.
What would be your advice to me at that company to be able to start taking steps towards practicing design thinking and product thinking?
Well, I think the easy answer is to make sure that designers have a seat at the table. And you know, what that means is, I mean, first of all, if design is a competitive advantage in the product or service that you're providing, then you cannot outsource it. You can't outsource your competitive advantage. And that means building design talent in-house, attracting design talent, which is hard. And then making sure that design has as much power as any other leader within the company and is represented at the table. Design should never be done and presented by someone else. The designers should present their design to the team. And if you really involve designers also in things like developing the marketing copy and everything else, then you're starting to become a design-driven business because your end-to-end experience is designed. And another thing I don't understand is when in large companies, the marketing copy is born out of a team other than the product team, which to me makes no sense. Like how could the copy of the product experience itself be different from the onboarding emails that you get when you join or the re-engagement emails when you stop using it? Like it all has to be one experience. I think designers in a company when they're sufficiently empowered can help make that happen. So I think that's one of the very important things to think about, and you know, as you're starting a business or trying to make your business more design-driven.
Awesome. I think we have about 3 minutes left. I'd love to turn it to the audience. If anyone has a question for Scott, easy or hard, raise your hand, and I think someone will come find you with a mic, and
cool.
do a little Q&A.
Yeah, what's on anyone's mind?
Scott,
Yeah.
How do you think, you talked about discovery within the voice, within the voice interface as a challenge. How do you think that's going to get resolved to enable all of these long-tail services?
And it's a good question about how is discovery going to happen in the voice world? And so I'm not sure. Like where my head is at is this: either it won't, in which case there will be basically 15 tops functionalities that people en masse use voice for.
Like the app ecosystem of these.
Right. I mean, it's, what's the weather? I need a car. I want to buy this. Whatever the top sort of major categories are, and that the platform will then determine who the default provider is for that based on all sorts of economics happening under the hood, which is a sad end state, right? I think the other alternative is that voice accompanies another type of surface. And for example, those of you that have an Echo Show, which is like the first screen-enabled Echo device, it's totally a game changer. Because when you ask questions, you suddenly get all these options. And whenever it's in ambient mode, it always is promoting and merchandising things you didn't know you could do. And so maybe that ends up being the right direction for voice. And maybe there's some third discovery model that I haven't even thought of yet. But I think that those are the two most likely.
Time for one more question, and we got to get off this stage.
And how many folks are in startups here, out of curiosity? Is it mostly like, who's in an early stage startup company? And then who's in like a company over 100 people? All right, so more folks. Because you asked me what I was working on these days. I'm kind of doing this because no one's asking questions. But you kind of asked me.
Monologue.
You asked me what I've been working on. So the other project I've been working on for a few years that I'm hoping to finish soon is this like project chronicling like the middle journey. And actually not just for startups, but also for large companies. Because everyone always talks about the glamour of the starts and the finishes of everything. The headlines, journalists love to chronicle like what happens in the start when people quit their job and start something new or raise money, or when something gets acquired or goes public or whatever. But there's like all the stuff that happens in the middle, like those years of ambiguity and uncertainty and trying again, and also kind of optimizing whatever seems to be working in the team and the product and how you're managing the team and whatever. I feel like it gets way too much spotlight. I mean, way too little spotlight, way too little actual discussion of what's happening in the middle. So I'm trying to put together a project which hopefully will become a book about insights around like the middle of the journey. And so, as a side note to anyone here, if anyone has like a very strong, heartfelt insight about how you endured or optimized in the middle of your journey, I certainly welcome you to share it with me, because that's my latest venture project on the side.
That's awesome. I look forward to reading it. Thank you very much for being
having me
here with us, Scott. And thank you for listening.
Cool, thanks.